Okay, welcome everybody in the future, online and in person. Today's lecture will be a little bit different. As I just explained to everybody here, we're going to be doing a bit of both theory and practice today. We're going to have a bit of philosophy lecture, a bit of actual dancing going on, and we're going to learn about know-how, what it is to be embodied, and then we're going to communicate and see like what kind of ideas we come up with together. So I'll probably go 25-30 minutes and then we'll switch over and get on with our exercise for the day. Thank you, Eric and dancers, for coming to class. It's awesome to have you. This is like a totally different new thing that we're doing. So I'm excited to see it happen, and thanks for making it happen. Okay, so let's get started with the lecture. So the idea of lecture tonight is to sort of frame and theme how we might want to think. It's not like this is how you have to think, of course, but like how we might want to think about what we're going to see in our dancing exercise later on. Sort of give us some questions to frame how we interpret, and to give us some ideas to maybe inspire how we read and see the movement, and maybe even at the end of class understand our own movement and place and body as well. So without further ado, the first slide, the mind-body problem, this I have here because I think it's going to be sort of like an underlying feature of any kind of subject or topic or question that we have to do with embodiment and the role of the mind in body. And this is an age-old philosophical problem, which comes to us from ultimately Descartes, right? We remember in the Cogito, he says, I am a thing that thinks, and then uses his power of cognition to determine that the wax is extended in space, and through its extension is something distinct from thought, right? We read this in the meditations earlier on in our semester. But the idea of the mind-body problem is just that there are two kinds of substance. There's mental substance and there's physical substance. And they're ontologically, or just like structurally, completely different. They're distinct from one another, right? That mental substance is the stuff of thoughts and of intentions, of desires and wishes, of wants and feelings. Whereas the physical stuff, the physical substance, is hard, extended, in space. Right, it's to be measured. It's an empirical sort of object. It's stuff that's actually stuff. It's not just this nebulous, who knows where the thoughts are in the world. And as humans, we experience not just both, right? We have thoughts, we have mental content as a part of our lives, but we also have physical bodies. And in being at the intersection of these two kinds of substance, experience what has been known to be called the mind-body problem, which is how does the one sort of stuff being completely different from the other sort of stuff cause anything across boundaries? How does being, like poked with a stabby object cause the mental object ow? And likewise, how does the mental object raise my hand above my head cause my physical hand to raise above my head, right? So we might be able to explain billiard balls moving, right? By one ball hits the other ball. This is a physical causal explanation. And we might be able to explain how beliefs can change each other. If you convince me that Big Macs are really bad for me, then I might also believe that I shouldn't eat Big Macs anymore, right? And so like the billiard balls, thoughts can change each other. But where we get a crossover between the mental and the physical is an open question. And Descartes had an answer to this, which was really bad, which was just that it did, right? Through the powers of vitality, the spirit is able to zap into the body somehow and move it. But this doesn't seem like a very clear answer at all. It doesn't give us the sort of causal explanation that satisfies, say, like the billiard balls or the beliefs changing one another. How does something ethereal and out there change something physically here? You might think, well, it all happens in the brain, right? It's the firing of neurons. It's the shooting off of neurophysiological chemicals through the brain, which then sends responses into the body. And you'd be right, there's certainly a correlation there. But when you're measuring the neurophysiological responses, your neurons firing off, where do you find the thought? Where in a neuroscience study do you see a mental state? You only see the physical manifestations of those mental states, right? We don't actually see the states themselves. The human part of it, the mental part of it, remains out of our experience of our empirical study of the physical movement. So we can see correlation, right, between mental stuff and physical stuff, but where we actually get the robust causation is a big open question. And it's not a question we're going to answer today, but it is certainly one that lies at the heart of everything that we're going to be talking about and seeing and engaging with. So you can see in the comic, my body get up. No, it's not causing. So fast forward like 350 some odd years to Gilbert Ryle, 1949, publishes this book, Concept of Mind. It's an awesome book. It's almost a polemic. It's so like rhetorically powerful. But in Concept of Mind, Ryle says, look, we've been wrongly befuddled. We've been convinced that there is a distinction at all between mind and body. And Descartes has pulled the cloth over our eyes for 350 years and completely ruined our minds. We've been thinking wrong for all this time. And he accuses Descartes of inventing this idea of the ghost in the machine, right? That human bodies are like machines, and that there's this ghost, this like mental substance, the I, the thing that thinks, that then like the little gnomes that are actually in our brains as they pull their levers and move our bodies about, right? That it is, the ghost is somehow able to overcome the mind-body challenge, this causal problem, and make the physical form move. But Ryle wants to say, look, there's no such thing as a ghost in the machine, that we can explain all of our epistemic mental content in terms of dispositional physical states, that the body itself is enough to explain the mental stuff that Descartes wanted us to. And we can just avoid all of this mind-body nonsense and get on with our behavioral science of the day. He wasn't quite a super strong behaviorist. He was a behaviorist, but not like the B.F. Skinner Pavlovian sort with the dogs, drooling with the whistles. Okay, so Ryle invites us to think about the following example. Imagine you're on one of these university tours, right? Where you have a young 20-year-old kid walking backwards uphill for 3 hours. It's amazing how they do it. And pointing out along the tour, here is the library, here's the student union, here's the physical sciences building, here's the humanities building, there's the gym and the sports fields, whatever. And at the end of the tour, the tour guide finds you looking confused, befuddled, as if you had been there for a reason and had missed something very important. And so the tour guide asks you, do you have any questions for me? And you respond, again, befuddled, yeah, where's the university? Right, so now it's the tour guide's turn to be befuddled and confused. They say, well, I just showed it to you. I showed you the student union, and I showed you the library, and I showed you the physical science building. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I showed you all of the parts, right? And you say, no. Where's the university? I saw the buildings, but I didn't see the university. And so what Ryle does with this example is just analogizes it to where's the mind, right? That the idea of there being a university over and above all of the buildings on campus and in the quad is just like one thought too many. There's no university that exists. It's a very Humean point, right? Where Hume says, look, all I have are the impressions of sensations. Nowhere do I find an I, a self that lives through all the impressions. I just have sensations themselves individually, right? So Ryle is making a similar sort of Humean move here and saying, look, there is no such thing as the university that metaphysically somehow ties all of these buildings together. There just are the buildings, but we don't need the concept of the university, or likewise, in the analogous case of the mind, to explain all of the important work that's done at the university or in the body necessarily. So if we're asking, like, where's the mind? Is it here? Well, no, that's my forehead. Is it here? That's my forearm. Is it, like here? No, that's like my heart. Nowhere do I find a mind, only do I find the parts of the body. And so Ryle then uses this argument to say, look, there's no such thing as a ghost in the machine. All there is the body itself. And so it must be able to do everything that we think mind is able to do, the mental substance, but without committing ourselves to the existence of this stuff called mental substance. The body has everything it needs already. And again, as I mentioned, we may not want to be committed this strongly to Ryle's behaviorist claim. I bring Ryle up because he's famous and the point in the debate is prescient and helpful. We don't have to commit ourselves to there being no such thing as mental substance or no ghost in the machine at all. But what Ryle does is at least invites us to question how distant the mental stuff and the physical stuff really are. And if there is an overlap or a gray area or just a complete one-to-one correspondence, that there just is a single unit of like causal energy that works through the nexus of our bodies. It invites us to ask where that overlap is and how it functions through us. And Ryle's most famous move, like even more famous than the ghost in the machine quote, is to distinguish between what he calls knowledge how and knowledge that. That when investigating this overlap of mind and body and its function through us, how it works, we need to distinguish between a kind of knowledge called knowledge how and a kind of knowledge that. So what is this distinction? Imagine a chef making a risotto. The chef has made the risotto hundreds of times before. They have no trouble doing it. They hear order up one risotto and the rice is already in the pan, the water, the cheese, the herbs, everything is moving, right? They don't need to consult the recipe because they know how to cook the risotto, as opposed to our unfortunate Google recipe person who ends up reading a lifestyle blog. This person doesn't know how to cook a risotto, and so they look up a recipe. They get knowledge that. They get this explicit propositional knowledge, right? Step 1, wash the rice. Step 2, boil the rice. Step 3, or simmer it. Step 3, cook the rice with herbs and salt or whatever, right? We get an explicit representation of every step that our professional chef, who just knows how to cook the risotto and doesn't need to think about it, doesn't need to consult a recipe, just does it, has the knowledge sort of in the action itself, that is represented in the recipe through knowledge that. So a knowledge how is something like a disposed knowledge that. It's an embedded, ingrained, something that gets built in through habit, repetition, but not always through habit and repetition, as we'll see later on. That knowledge how and the knowledge that is represented without this sort of like explicit power of mind, without this explicit representation of propositional instruction, 1, 2, 3, do this, do that, can be a sort of knowledge that isn't just routinized, but is flexible and, strictly speaking, intelligent. So just to give sort of some maybe necessary conditions, but at least like helpful examples or qualities of knowledge how. Knowledge how is automatic. It's implicit as opposed to explicit, as with the recipe or just doing it. It's non-propositional typically, meaning it doesn't come with language or intentional executive instruction, right? In the sense of like, do this, do that. The this and that just happen. They just occur through the performance of cooking the risotto or whatever else. Knowledge how is typically kinesthetically represented. There might be interesting edge cases of know-how with like mental processes. Like, I don't know, you know how to do a Sudoku or something. I'm not certain, but there might be cases that you could come up with that fit that description. But typically speaking, know-how is kinesthetically represented. It's represented through the body. It's knowledge how as exemplified through particular action. Excuse me. And knowledge how, especially for Ryle, is habitual and dispositional, that we train ourselves, that we build in this knowledge into our bodies. We get a kind of muscle memory for Ryle specifically, but muscle memory doesn't seem to explain all of the cases of knowledge how that we'll look at shortly. And importantly, knowledge how is intelligent. It's not just a kind of rote mechanized action. It's a truly intelligent form of action. But we should question this. And is it working? Yeah, it's working. This is a image that they show in medical school. So why should we think of bodily knowledge or knowledge how as a form of intelligence? Because look at these two cases side by side. When the knee kicks as it's struck on the patella, it's automatic, right? It wasn't like intended. It's implicit as opposed to explicit. It's something in the knee itself and in the structure of the leg, rather than in the structure of mind and person and deciding how to move the knee. The knee's movement is non-propositional. It doesn't come with knee move, right? Every time it kicks. It's kinesthetic. It's habitual or dispositional. It's built into the knee like a loaded spring, just waiting for the right input to output the action of kick when it's struck. Hopefully, otherwise your doctor will be very concerned about your leg. But it's not intelligent, right? That's the difference. And so we see a kind of rote mechanized action that doesn't look like the cooking the risotto, the know-how, the kind of action that is both built into our body like this, but is also intelligent. So where do we get that distinction? I'll give you 3 reasons to think that they are to be distinguished. And one is in the case of expertise, which is, this is what I'm writing my dissertation on. This is my area of research and my own expertise. So if you're interested in this particular stuff, reach out to me. Happy to chat more. In fact, always very excited to chat more about this. So in the literature on expertise, we have a distinction between intelligently automatic action and like rote mechanized action, which hinges upon the idea that 1, automatic actions are flexible and sensitive to complex shifting environment affordances in environments. So as environments change, experts are still able to be in like an automatic state of performance, just reacting, but their reactions are seemingly intelligent. They're reacting to features of their environment that they're not like thinking about how to do what they need to do. They just do it. But it's also not like a knee kicking. They're performing incredibly complex and articulate, minute actions. Every muscle movement that's required of them to act as such. So this is a picture of Adam Ondra, the best climber in the world, according to me and most other people, but not the Olympics. Climbing the hardest route in the world, silence. Nobody has climbed a route of this grade ever before, and I think he's the only one who's completed silence as well. And in his video, it's an amazing video. It's like 20 minutes too, so it's worth watching. Ondra has this like incredible ability to describe what he's doing as he's doing it, like what his mental state is or was in performance. It's like a wonderful empirical tool for inspiration to do with this topic. But he says that for the first like 25 moves of the problem, he blacked out, right? That he just like wasn't there. But there goes his body just like swinging about, grabbing these like impossible holds that you watch other famous climbers attempt silence, and they're like, I don't have any idea how you could like hold that and have your entire body suspended by this slope or crimp or whatever. And in this blacked out state, Ondra is acting intelligently, that every shift of his arm is certainly like learned because he's practiced it so much, but where exactly he grips is going to be a little bit different every time, right? And how he crimps is going to be a little bit different every time. So how he crimps will change how he needs to move and shift his body across the problem so that he stays in balance and stays on the rock wall. And likewise to conserve energy. And so in these small articulate movements through a consciously blacked out state, it seems that Ondra is doing what we might call acting with intelligent automaticity, that he's acting automatically. He's not thinking or deciding how and what to do, he's just doing it. But that doing is intelligent. It's responsive to the environment and the very particular way in which he moves from hold to hold. Another example of why we should think of know-how as intelligent is Gestalt. So who's seen this image before? Okay, none of you answer. If you've seen this, none of you answer either. You've all seen, who hasn't seen this image before? This will be easier. Okay. What do you see?
A duck.
What do you see? That was lucky. That I don't normally get like both back to back. But this image, can you guess what it's called? Wait. Who also hasn't seen this before? Can you guess what this is called? Based on our answers. There you go. It's called the duck rabbit. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So the duck rabbit is a very famous philosophical example of Gestalt. Gestalt is this old psychological tradition that's a little spooky and interesting. It was also invented around the time of psychoanalysis, and Freud, doing all his cocaine, made psychoanalysis way cooler than Gestalt, and so Gestalt kind of fell out of favor. But Gestalt is really interesting. So like in psychology, the idea is that there's figure and ground. There's an object that is the center of our attention, and then there's everything else in the background of that object. And what you can do is perform this Gestalt where you shift the object that is like set apart from the background into the background, and then pick out another object and send it forward. So you can do this like this thing. And this can happen like emotionally and existentially, but in this case, we're doing it perceptually, right? What you do is you see the object, the lines on the upper left of this image as a bill, a duck's bill, or as ears. And it's argued that you can't see both the duck and the rabbit at the same time. You have to like perform the Gestalt to switch. That's controversial, but it's not terribly controversial. I mean, like, am I looking at a duck or am I looking at a rabbit? And I seem to like switch back and forth, right? So the Gestalt is just like shifting where the background and the foreground is in your perception, right? At least with respect to perception in this case. How about this one? What do you see? It's okay if you've seen it before. You can cheat. An old woman? Does anybody not see an old woman?
I see a young woman.
Yeah, thank you for humoring me. Yeah, so you can see, you can do the Gestalt thing again. Here's like her chin, or the old woman's chin, or the young woman's neck, right? So you get your like very bohemian young French woman in a fur coat, or your like kind of Polish babushka, also in a fur coat, by performing this Gestalt, shifting foreground and background. And it can also be abstract, so you can see like the three Pac-Men about to eat each other, or a triangle, right? This sort of thing. So it turns out that experts, and not just experts, like everybody does this. Well, I suppose everybody in the sense that they are perceptual experts, which we all are with respect to faces. I'll explain that in a minute. Do this too. They perform this gestalt automatically without even thinking about it. It just happens. And it's not like a mental process of like, I'm thinking about duck and I see duck. I'm thinking about rabbit, I see rabbit. No, it's that it just occurs under the surface of conscious experience, that through perception, the eyes themselves will look in a way that creates gestalt, so that the mind can apperceive, pick out the sorts of objects and targets that it wants to find. And I work in a psych lab too. I run a lab, and we just submitted our second study on this. So this is a pretty robust phenomenon. It's called holistic visual processing. And the idea is that radiologists specifically, but it's also in like TSA agents, in athletes, ornithologists. You all do it in facial recognition. So like when you're looking at faces, you holistically process, but what is it? So we use eye tracking, and we can see that experts, when looking at images within their domain of expertise, will scan their eyes all the way across the image and all around it. So it's like each eye movement is really long, like way longer than a normal person, a non-expert looking at this image. And what the eye does in moving so long is it collects all sorts of peripheral visual data, peripheral and parafoveal. So fovea is like exactly directly where you're looking. Parafoveal is like here, and peripheral is like here, right? So you're collecting all like a ton of non-foveal visual data because you're moving your eyes so long. As the eye moves across, it collects all this other information, not just where it sees, right? And then in moving really long and collecting all this peripheral data, your eyes will perform a gestalt without even thinking about it, right? It just happens that the eyes have all this peripheral data, and then they gestalt into the target or aberrancy, if there is one, when it pops out or presents itself from this holistic sort of conception of the image. So the idea is that experts see the whole of an image and then like target straight into the aberrancy that they're looking for. And just to like bring the point home, like how amazing this is and automatic. My PI, the guy who gives me money to run the lab, he did, I think it was just after he got hired here at Utah, he did some radiology studies where he showed that if you flash images of radiographs in front of radiologists at like 300 milliseconds, so like 0.3 seconds each image, and then you just have a button yes and no, like is something wrong? And half the images have something wrong. They're 70% accurate. They're not like thinking like, oh, where is the wrong thing? They're just like, boop, 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 you know, like every 0.3 seconds and 70% correct. It's amazing, right? So what's happening is the eye is automatically with the radiologist doesn't control, you know, like their eye. They might, you know, like decide to look in certain spots, but how the eye does look within certain spots is not up to them. And the eye automatically performs this holistic construction that then elicits the gestalt. And so the body is performing this very intelligent process to give the mind the answers that it wants, the information that it needs in order to tell the patient you're okay, or we should, you know, do more tests or whatever. Right? So back to the question, why should we think of bodily knowledge, know-how as intelligent? Well, through automaticities like this form of movement of the eye, the body collects, parses, and distributes perceptual data to and for the mind, that it's all sort of happening before the mind even interacts with the world, that the collection of information itself looks to be intelligent. And finally, the body doesn't just know in the sense of like intelligent automaticity, how to like grip the holds or, you know, like respond to the world. Nor does it just knowledgeably use its intelligence, as in the case of holistic processing and gestalt. It also communicates intelligence too, that it seems to have its own form of interrelation, both with itself and with other bodies, that supersedes or undersedes it. It just operates sort of in parallel to the communications and information and knowledge transferred through mind. And here's an example that through our little facial expressions, our micro muscle movements in the face, we can share so much information, right? Just little bits. That's all it takes, right? And we might remember from our personal identity unit, for those of us who are concerned about the bodily continuity in cases of body swap. So a body swap for our dancers is like, my students know this joke, but like the reason that you should never give philosophers money to do science, because what we'll do is we'll take two people and then take their brains out of their bodies and then put them in the other bodies and then see what happens for fun. So the idea of a body swap is just that when you put someone else's mind in your body and your mind in someone else's body, who's who, right? And in the case of like, I think that, let's say, for instance, I think that it's the body that makes me me. Then I might also think that the body makes me me because of the way that I move my face. Like I have very expressive eyebrows, and if I'm in somebody else's body and they don't have the like muscles of their eyebrows to express themselves, then all of a sudden I'm trying to communicate and it's not being received, right? That nobody would recognize me because even though it's my mind in that new body, the body isn't communicating and it's not sending the right sort of like body language, emotional intelligence sort of features of communication that express themselves through micro muscle movements of the face, right? So here we see a way in which faces as bodies communicate to other faces and bodies. And I think there's probably no other more exciting example than Willem Dafoe here in The Lighthouse in the harp scene where he's cursing Robert Pattinson for not liking me lobster. And you don't need to know that Willem Dafoe is like raining verbal hell down on Robert Pattinson. You just need to see his face. This is a still image and you can see the like rage and terror and like horror unto you expression in it, that it's just so powerful. And like, you didn't blink for the whole curse scene. Is amazing. But anyways, there is just like so much information captured and shared and expressed just through the still image, right? So here the body is like, when it presents itself, it represents a form of communication that is not propositional or mental or like what I'm doing right now in lecturing. It's something very different. It's communicating fear through the power of the body alone. And also through motion, right? Through dance, that bodies communicate aesthetically, that they move themselves with ideas in the world, they manipulate the world, that even choreographers can move individual bodies together, such that maybe even the bodies themselves don't know what's going on, but the audience sees something like collectively through the motion of the dancers, the performers on stage. That through this aesthetic orientation, physical bodies are able to communicate things that the mind just doesn't, right? And that it's not just to others that the body communicates, but also to itself, right? Like, I love climbing and I think that I learn about myself from learning about the way that I climb and how I like overcome problems through like physically overcome problems, that I can see like parallels and analogies to how I overcome problems mentally and stuff, right? That there is something in the information of aesthetics and the way in which we realize and live those aesthetic orientations that can go from bottom up to top down and vice versa. So bodies represent themselves aesthetically, and through this aesthetic orientation, they communicate. But the question is how, right? So we see examples of this. We know it happens. Just with the mind-body problem, it's only a problem because here it's happening, right? I say like raise my arm and I raise my arm, right? It's only a problem because I can't explain what's going on, but I know that it happens. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem. So same thing here. Bodies are doing this aesthetic communication thing, but how is it happening? So I want to invite us to like have sort of like 3 questions on our mind as we move into the next part of tonight's lecture, which is how do bodies communicate aesthetically at all? What is it that they're doing, right? And how is it that they transition or flow from different forms of representation to communicate, as like with a sentence flowing from different words and objects of representation, propositional representation? How is it that the physical representations themselves cause meaning to be understood, right? Or if not understood, then like to be shared and had somehow. Likewise, what is it for a body to share information with another body or another mind, right? To make an idea come alive in motion, or through motion give rise to an idea. And then in that vein, what is it for a body to communicate to itself through aesthetic representation? How do we learn from ourselves by being embodied? And what is there in our own private lives that becomes meaningful just in virtue of how we are physically with ourselves? And ultimately, what is it to know something through dance? So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric and his dancers.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
That was awesome. It was really great. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. We're delighted to be here. When I proposed it to the dancers, they were totally psyched. And so what I thought we would do is, as a choreographer, I play a lot of games with dancers, and a lot of these games have built-in chance elements to it, because I feel like creativity without having an X factor, without trying to solve for X, doesn't really make sense to me. As I'm always looking to create some kind of situation where I don't have the answer, right? And I tend to cast people who I know I can learn something from. And so we create these games, these situations in which we're trying to solve some kind of problem, and that what emerges is something like art. And so what I thought we would do with your help is, I guess, play a little game, get a process going where a dance can emerge before our eyes, right? A complex system can emerge before our eyes. So I want to just tell you about some of the tools that I use. I throw a lot of dice because I like to work with chance. And this is a 12-sided die that has body parts on it. So it's kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons type of die. And then this is sort of your typical 6-sided die. And every dot on this die is going to represent 6 facets of this room, right? So, I mean, for us, in the language that we use, like number 1 will be downstage. Number 2 will be stage right. Number 3 will be upstage. 4, stage left. 5 will be the floor, and 6 will be the ceiling. So I'm just wondering, Katie, would you be game to throw dice for
Sure.
Stephanie? So you're going to basically give 2 variables, and Stephanie's going to kind of create a relation.
Right arm, and was 2 stage right.
2 is stage right.
Great.
So all the dancers have to do is kind of create one sort of big, bold gesture, and you can work on that, Stephanie, while I give the dice to Alex. Alex, could you throw for Nick, please? Yeah. What's that?
Chest.
Chest 4? Chest 4 or chest 4?
Leads left.
Yes.
I remember.
Thank you. Yeah. Emma, would you mind throwing for Megan?
Left hand 6.
Okay, thanks. So could you remind me of your name, please? I'm Tim. Would you mind throwing for Nikita, please?
Full body and 3.
Ooh.
Great. Bang. That's what we got. Nice. Safety third. Always, yeah, always. So can you remind me of your name?
Chestnut.
Would you mind rolling for Haley?
Chest and 5.
Chest and perfect. That's great. This is excellent. Good. All right. So dancers, so you all have a philosopher. You have a dancer. Okay. So you all kind of have an idea. Big, bold. Cool. Okay. So now part 2 here is that we need to assemble a common language. So we need to sort of stitch or Frankenstein all these moves together into what we call a phrase. So can we just do it in the order that we went? So Stephanie, can you teach your move? Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. All right. All right. So there's like a big circle there, right?
Big circle
Big circle.
and kind of a snap
Oh,
or
like a snap. Okay.
jump
Nice.
there and reverb.
Yeah, reverberation.
Reverberation, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Kind of have it.
Yes.
All
I
right,
think
cool.
so.
Let's just kind of go through there. Well, I just sort of mentioned one thing here. So I was thinking about how this concept of, well, we'll work on embodiment all the time, right? And we also work on proprioception through our training. And so, you know, Oliver Sacks's book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, is awesome because there's this great chapter called The Disembodied Lady, a woman that loses her sense of proprioception, which is her body's sense of itself in space. Sort of like when you close your eyes and you can still know where your hands are. That's proprioception. And so this idea of ghost in the machine is really interesting because that woman, Christina, in the book, when she loses her proprioception, I am imagining this is what she feels like, right? She feels like a ghost in a machine. There's an interesting video on YouTube about a man who lost his proprioception and needs to use his eyes to make sure to be able to direct all of his limbs, because without seeing them, suddenly, you know, his limbs could be floating around. He has no sense of the body in space. And so the body in space is something that is just sort of baked into dance training in a way, right? And to be sort of like both mindful and then at an odd time forgetful of it all too. So like there's an interesting aspect of forgetting that comes with this idea of integrating, right? Learning something so deeply that we don't have to think about it. So where are we right now?
Sorry.
Okay, all right, all right.
So just to clarify what's going on is everybody's learning everybody's.
Everyone's learning everybody. So what we'll do is basically create, we're gonna, this next step of the game is to create this unison phrase. And then we start to really play with this.
Okay.
All right. So we just need to drop it to the ground.
Perfect. Perfect. Yes, yes, yes. Nice. Good.
What?
And make sure you use your hands, right? Because I did this one time, like in my 20s, and it cracked my chin open. Yeah, it's not good. Yeah, make sure you use your hands.
And then just drop.
Can we do it all together? Unison?
Yeah.
Okay, ready? And. Yeah, all right, okay, all right, all right. You got something. You got something. Okay, cool. So now we're gonna mess with this. And I feel like that's kind of like my job is to just kind of create havoc with something that's so nice like this. We're gonna play a game that we call puppeting. And so there's gonna be one puppet and 4 puppeteers. And it's the job of the puppeteers to move the puppet through this phrase that they all know. So we go through this unison process. So we've all kind of embodied it. We know what we need to do. We know where the puppet needs to go. And so now we have to choose a puppet. Takers. Megan, is that you?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll do it if you want me to.
Well, I mean, unless there's sort of anybody. All right, then. Let's go for it. Okay, so puppeteers, you need to move the puppet through this phrase, and you can do it directly through contact or indirectly through like the force, right? Using the force, using like magnetism. You can be directly in contact with the puppet, or you can start influencing another puppeteer. That kind of makes sense. You're always influencing somebody, and it's either going to be Megan or it's going to be one of your fellow puppeteers. You're going to be influencing them either through contact or through like implied contact. That make sense?
Yes.
All right, so the floor is yours. Yeah. So what is going to happen here is that that original phrase,
Which is all of their moves like together.
exactly,
Yeah.
that unison thing that they all did together, that is going to have to change, right? So in a way, it's sort of like this flexible bit of choreography that we can always go back to, But the nature of this kind of complex interaction stuff is just going to get changed. So typically the stuff that gets changed is the timing of something, or its speed, or its location in space.
Not the hands. Maybe at the shoulder. Yeah, you can also. Because there's like a.
There's also like an option for.
And so I have no idea what they're going to do. I don't know how this is going to wind up at all.
Yeah, I really do that. Cool.
Yeah, I think I still way can move and then you have the hip or something.
And you're welcome to come closer if you want to sort of see this or move around yourself, you know, if you want to kind of get closer. And we can totally keep talking too.
Beautiful.
So can you explain the role of the puppeteer again in how the original phrase gets shifted?
Yeah.
Like what's the rule?
What's the rule?
Yeah.
The rule is basically to create a very complex system of partnering is what this is all about.
So the puppeteers are also doing the movements.
The puppeteers have some choices, right?
I know.
Their main goal is to influence the action of the puppet.
Okay.
The puppet is going to move through the phrase that we know, that we recognize.
But the puppeteers have to be in sync with each other in the movement of the puppet.
They have to be influencing
That's true, I know.
somebody
So
else.
we can like collect it up, but.
Yeah, right. So it's sort of like Haley might be influencing Megan and Nick might be influencing Nikita, that
So, like,
somehow
way
they're all,
Okay.
yeah, somehow they're all involved
Yeah, we can change.
directly or indirectly in this process of moving Megan through this phrase.
Cool.
And I wonder if there's something about like surface of your back.
But it creates a lot of complexities really fast and a lot of texture.
That felt cool. I don't know.
I know.
So now that was an interesting thing, like how do we make decisions in all of this? You know, how do we say like yes to
Yeah,
things
I
and
feel
no
like
to
there's-
other things? It's sort of like a spectrum of pleasure and pain, you know?
Yeah.
I wonder if I can just. You should do what you did.
Yeah, I don't know. I just got up.
Then just do it again. Yeah. I don't know, it's gonna probably years, yeah.
Oof, wow.
That felt cool. Okay, and then we have Nikita's. Oh, I can trick you. Can I push your chest?
Yeah, go for it. They're
Oh,
big, right?
yeah, I was
Out of the
like-
way. Are you, does your chest go forward first?
Well, it goes back and then forward.
I have a theatrical idea. Really behind me. You can come up and then like,
Oh,
Yeah.
drop that. Yeah, yeah.
Could I throw in an alternative,
yes,
Yeah.
which is that Nick, you are in a position to pull Megan directly
Yeah.
off stage. You
Yeah,
know, if Megan, if that's okay.
it,
yeah. So we come here.
Yeah, and then.
Yeah, and I
so, yep.
wonder if I could just like,
It could be like a little bit of yes or a little lift, maybe.
yeah,
yeah,
is that
if
cool?
you're comfortable with that.
yeah.
There we go.
Is that okay?
That's
Cool.
Let's do that.
There you go.
Then I fall through ya. Yeah,
Well, okay, here's a thought. So Haley, where are you when Megan gets pulled back?
So I was contacted with their hand, but I think I
Yes.
said I end up letting go.
Cool, okay, all right. Now, Haley, can you lie down, sort of like on the floor, like do Megan's movement? And Megan, can you do it on top of Haley?
This.
Boom, boom.
I don't wanna put my weight
No,
on.
you can do it. The way, oh yeah.
Something like this.
All over,
Yeah.
slowly.
No.
I don't
You
know.
know.
No, exactly, Haley. No, don't lower yourself.
Oh,
So,
yeah, right.
well, no, use your hands.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So
Should
from,
back
We're gonna go
From-
from, yeah,
from
maybe the
top.
top.
yeah,
So what's interesting is that there's also like so much conversation that needs to happen in this process that oftentimes when we're watching dances, we don't get all that conversation. All this negotiation. Yeah, boom, Haley, and boom.
Did that hurt?
I think we need some counterpoint. Yeah, we need different levels. So there's this interesting thing where I feel like Nick, when you pull Megan and Haley are still connected, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you pull Megan, can that, like if you stay connected, can Megan basically pull you to the floor? You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Let's see, let's do it slow.
I also need them to translate
Here.
stuff that's like half baked in my head into action.
Yeah, so can you explain what you saw and in the need for counterpoint, what that means?
Yes, yeah. So they,
Just a contact.
a couple minutes ago, they all kind of landed on the floor, right? And for me, I was just like, this was an aesthetic choice for me, where I was just like, that's like a lot of like bodies all doing the same thing. And I felt like I wanted some kind of
I
difference,
feel like.
some kind of
what
variation.
might be the
And
key
so one of the things
is
that
like
I
we
saw
just
to vary
want
is
access
levels,
back.
right? The height of some of the dancers.
Oh, yeah.
Pulling this
Then
way.
there needs to be some, yeah, I can move out of the way.
So you're more looking like this, so.
Yeah, okay, let's try to find that tactic.
Yeah, so from.
It's Megan pulls Haley, and boom.
Oh,
Yeah,
Sorry.
so then my question is the timing.
yeah,
When you land on Haley sooner. So
yeah,
it's almost like Nick, the moment he pulls you back, you're already going down.
okay.
Yeah, cool.
So a lot of this is also like aesthetics of timing, right? Aesthetics of timing. I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
okay, nice. Cool, right on. Can we go from the top?
Yeah.
So from the top, the idea is it's the original phrase that's now been reinterpreted through everyone's co-contributions
Yes.
to create something that resembles but is unique.
Yeah, and what I mean by go from the top is go from the top of this kind of dense sort of networky
Yeah.
thing that we've just done.
Where we're at.
So in a way, the step to create that unison, that's just sort of like a stepping stone to, get everybody on the same page in terms of the information,
Okay.
right? The basic information. So everyone's also contributing to it. And then we sort of like let it go and start working with the more complex stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is like there's so much dense traffic immediately,
Mhm.
right? That the dancers are always, because two bodies can't be in the same place at the same time, are going to have to sort of find all these sort of like workarounds. And it's the workarounds, it's out of these workarounds that I think that the art starts emerging. Could we try?
Yeah.
All right. Nice. Stephanie, I think let's make it some kind of choice there at the end. Maybe it's sort of like, and Nick, where are you?
Yeah.
I'm thinking like some
Here.
kind of connect, some.
Ooh.
Oh, cool. Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
pretty
Yeah. I find myself attracted to situations of need, right? And compression in terms of space and time. Like when we compress space and time, it's like things get dramatic because space and time are like fundamental resources for choreographers and dancers. And so like, just like life, whenever resources get cut off, things get intense. And so this kind of intensification or this sense of like need, like human situations in which you can't tell if they're both the problem and the solution to somebody else's problem and solution, is something that I find endlessly fascinating. Cool. So do we need to go back just a notch so we can figure out what this is? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay, cool. Stephanie, can you get there at the same time that Megan? lands?
Yeah, I can show you.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing are an opportunity for synchronies to happen, synchronies, because that's another thing I'm always fascinated, like, why is synchrony such a fascinating thing? And I'm seeing an opportunity for Stephanie and Megan to kind of wham, like at the same time, connect, finish their action at the same time.
Oh, yeah. I love that. That's good. Yeah.
What we're gonna shoot for is the focus, that both of you end at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, let's try it.
Even sooner, Stephanie.
Yeah. No?
Stephanie, what do you do right before you lean on Nick?
I'm just like down here, so I think Megan's like.
Yeah, so I think that you have more distance to cover than Megan, so I think that, can you cut something short here to get to Nick sooner? Yeah, I think so,
Oh.
Can you try that?
No?
All right, not bad. Good. All right. To see dancers, I mean, I hope this doesn't sound cruel, but to sort of see dancers sort of struggle for something and like struggle as part of the aesthetic can be really intense. I mean, what's happening here is not easy at all. So like this kind of like architecture that's based on tension that they're creating is really compelling, right? Because it's like, what's going to happen? What is going to happen next? Can we do it again from the top?
Yeah.
Do you have a few more in you? Because we're probably going to do it a couple more times.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Woof. All right. Good. Cool. What's so interesting, which I could not have, I mean, I sensed that it was going to happen, but I didn't know where or how, was the sense of rhythm that happens sort of internally, right? It's sort of like they have created some kind of rhythmic situation, which is really interesting. Right on. It's awesome. See that? Yeah. And then maybe we can talk a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'd like to.
My foot got behind your side.
The carpet's
Me too.
slippery. Yeah.
Me too.
You want to redo it? Okay, sure.
Yeah. Redemption.
That's okay.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice. You know, for me also, there's something that is both profoundly human and alien too, that's happening at the same time. And what's interesting is like they have created through the rules of this game, it's like they've created this world that has rules. And maybe these rules are sort of, I mean, we kind of know the rules, but like if an audience hadn't really been in on the game and known what the rules were, it's sort of like we would sense that there would be maybe rules or a sense of coherence, a coherent world, but we wouldn't really know what the rules are that are holding it all together. Right. And that I always think is a fascinating thing to sort of pull back the curtain, like what holds the dance together, right? To be a repeatable thing, right? And so it's sort of like, you know, it's repetition. It's repetition and just drilling it and communication. So I'll stop there, but I mean, we'd love to just talk to you and see if you have any questions or.
Yeah, so did you guys, I had all sorts of fun observations, but it's not, I'm not a student. So like, what did you guys see? Like what stood out as interesting?
Something I was surprised I picked up on before you mentioned it was, sorry, I don't remember your names. Haley and Megan.
Yeah.
So I had been a dancer for many years and had stopped due to injuries and stuff when I was in like high school, but maybe it's just like past expertise or just having that requisite knowledge. But there was the one part where you were down like that and you were holding it, and I was thinking too, like, oh, the next move is going down, why don't you pull her? And then you said that, and it was something that just like intuitively came up, which I was surprised by myself to have that kind of observation, not having practiced in a long time, or been trained in this kind of level. So I don't know, it was just really interesting how quickly that like embodied intelligence kind of comes back when you're observing. And even if it's like not even on the part level of, you know, your abilities, you know, I'm nowhere near that, but just even like the kind of requisite knowledge that takes place when you're transferring through these kinds of movements. But yeah, I don't know.
I wonder, I mean, if we shared actually a certain moment, because I was actually remembering Nikita's move, which is sort of that, Nikita, can you show us that?
So like this one?
Yeah. So I remembered that Nikita had that move and Megan seemed to be in the perfect position for it, because that was like the next move to happen, right? So it's just like, oh yeah, well, yeah, let's go upstage and Nick is right there. And it's in a way, it's also like the aesthetics of the path of least resistance too. It's like, okay, Nick's there, perfect. Okay, Nick, this is your job. Move, Megan.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I don't know, to be able to like pick up on these things.
Did any of you guys feel that too? Like it like made sense or something, or just was the right thing?
I mean, I feel like we've done this exercise so many times that like those pathways that we find, like the swooshing on the back to like open our arms, like I don't know, that felt more natural just because we have done it so many times. But I remember doing this like freshman year and being like, what?
You mean this puppety exercise?
Yeah, like
Oh, yeah.
so I don't know if it's like always been something I've known how to do just because I've been dancing for however long I have, like 17 years. Like I think, I don't know. I think it's just practice and it's not necessarily something that's natural.
Well, but I think that's something that you're inherently valuing is a certain kind of precision with regard to space and time. And this practice of reproducibility. Now, what's interesting is like, Spencer, you were saying something about like bodily intelligence. And I feel like these folks have a combination of training in terms of like, where they learn patterns, right, from a teacher. And then they also have a lot of improvisation training, right? And so that improvisation training gives them a lot of skill with being able to adapt and to morph and to sort of cope with a dynamic and changing situation. Just by other bodies.
Like follow up too is just like making that observation also had me thinking about the like relationship between the audience and the dancers and like that kind of connection that can get fostered in that way. And it's like, I don't know, it's a really cool experience being an audience member and being able to, you know, watch this flow happen, but also feel a part of it in the sense of like, I'm feeling the rhythm of what's going on and I can see these pieces and the way they're moving and I can anticipate if something's going to happen or it feels like it should flow in a particular way. So then when it doesn't, you're like, oh, that's unexpected, or, you know.
That is an interesting observation because I do feel like I'm always sort of dancing in my head between this idea of familiarity and unfamiliarity, like always sort of like hunting for a surprise.
Yeah, but it has to be like timed correctly because otherwise it feels awkward
And
like
fit the
jolting.
rule too. It
Yeah.
has to like represent the original motion that was derived, right?
Yep.
What is a mystery to me is the sort of sense of timing that yields satisfaction, right? Like there's sort of timing where I'm just like, that doesn't feel quite right. And I don't know why. And let's speed it up. And yes, we've achieved some kind of satisfaction.
So that's one thing that I noticed that was really interesting, was in the like full performance, the sync up of breath and of like the sliding of feet, and almost like had its own oral rhythm to it as well. So it wasn't just like your body's moving, but like your sounds as well. Right? Is that something you think about or have like because it sounded to me like the breathing was almost intentional in some cases, right?
Yeah. I don't really think it's something we plan.
Just occurs.
I think after a long time of working with this stuff, our breath just like follows our movement, and we're all kind of on the same like wavelength in that way. So then they just match up together.
It is a fascinating problem, though, which is, or not problem, but phenomenon in the sense of like, how are you all doing that? How are you all synchronizing? How did this group find this rhythm together and just kind of like kind of coalesce into it?
I was about to say the same thing with breath. And the other thing I noticed is y'all's faces emote the same way and your eyes look the same way. And it's not necessarily the direction you're moving, but like they all look and then your faces all like turn with the same type of like emotion and satisfaction almost. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, so there's almost like a complete unity of sound, of vision, of physical motion, and maybe even like collective mind, right? That what you're doing and co-creating is both improvisational, you're just like coming up with a movement, but it's also like a back and forth. I heard all sorts of like communication between you guys. There's like, this is what's good and this is what's bad. But then there's all of the other small things that Rachel said that you didn't talk about, certainly, like the sounds and the way that you look and stuff that just happen.
That's fascinating. And I mean, like, I'm curious also if there's anything about the fact that the traffic is so dense between them, you know, and the denser the traffic, the higher the stakes in a certain way, you know, and I'm just sort of like curious about, it's like, I'm always thinking about Daredevil, and I'm always thinking about Spider-Man, you know, and these sort of like proprioceptive senses, like these extra senses that I feel like the dancers have to have, because it's like the situation that they're in is complex. I don't know. I mean, you know, are we making choices sort of out of protection, out of safety, you know, out of sort of a thrill too?
So I want to, like, in response to Rachel's question, ask a philosophical question in the class, right? Is what do we think that is? Like, what kind of knowledge is it that that makes the eyes all look the same way, that syncs up the breath, that creates these synchronies, as Eric was discussing during the talk? Should we consider that a kind of knowledge, or like an accident? Is that kind of unity across our dancers something that is more like the knee kicking, or more like this embodied knowledge? Where should we identify that synchrony? What do you think?
I think it's just like a professional like intuition that you sort of develop with any kind of profession, you know, like with every profession has its own language and like different terms that they use that someone from the outside wouldn't really understand, but like to them it just makes sense. They just kind of jump on the same page because they just both intuitively like know what they're doing.
Yeah. So let me challenge a little bit, like just push back to see like where the intuition is. If they all intuitively know, then are they communicating it to each other at all? Or is it just like a built-in that when this happens, that happens? Right? Is there a communication of like intuition? Like this is the intuition to have somehow? Or is it like accidental to the form of motion?
I think it's sort of both, because like the certain way they're moving also sort of implies the emotion, so they kind of figure out the emotion that they need from the movement.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, it's backward and forward communication through emotion, which I think is a cool description, because that speaks to like the aesthetic language that's being spoken in addition to the directive, like can you fall this way, or how about this? So it was a lot, I heard that all the time. Is this okay? Right. Yeah. So what do you guys think about this aesthetic language and how you communicate intuitions to one another? So it sounded to me like there were actual instructions, especially from Eric. But there were also like sentences like, is this okay? And then you would perform something. You're almost using like movements as objects of language. And what are your thoughts? Yeah, Nikita.
Sure. So I think like it's especially useful to have like a starting place. Like when Eric said like, well, we're gonna make like one single move that's like dynamic, like in this direction, that kind of like sets the world, at least initially. I think for like me and like maybe others, but like I feel like as long as like I have that starting place, then like the communication in the body is like not so much an intentional, I'm gonna show you, but like, oh, I'm gonna watch you, because instead of like communicating by like saying, I'm gonna communicate by like listening, and I know that you're gonna like receive information by listening. So I think I'm not necessarily trying to tell you any specific thing.
Oh, I see. Okay, so let's see if I understand then. Is it that like when I want you to understand a thought that I have, I tell you the thought, and it's like, did that make sense, right? As opposed to what it sounds to me like you're describing in communication, which is offering and then seeing what is received in the offering, and then that becomes what the agreement in understanding or meaning is.
Yeah.
Cool.
You know, if I could add to that, I wonder if, and I think that this is also, in a way, maybe the result also of training a certain way too, that intelligence manifests as a form of prediction, right? That it's almost like the point of intelligence is to predict. And I feel like there's probably an aspect of prediction that is going on very quickly as you're watching your partners move, people move around you. And what you're doing is you're sort of like forecasting that action, where that action is going to go, and where you can fit, you know, within it. So that there's something about almost seeing the future before it happens.
Yeah. Which is very much an emotional form of communication, is communicating the future. Before we do more in class, I have a student online who'd like to share.
Hi, am I okay to speak? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I just want to say this is like super fascinating. And I thought it was very interesting that you used earlier in the lecture, just like an example of a chef cooking, because I was both things, a dancer before, and I was a chef in a former life. So a lot of what we're talking about, like, gosh, I don't know where to start. Let's just start with the movement of the dancers. I think there is a lot of non verbal communication that's happening, much in the way that any skilled profession has their language, like someone mentioned earlier. There's a lot of non-verbals, right? So you can pick up on bodily cues and riff off of one another, just like musicians who can do that, right? Because they all like have their roles that they play, but can also just pick up on different melodies that someone's doing and then play off of that. Bodies are much in the same way that our bodies move like music, I think. Also, one last thing I wanted to mention is that I think the way that everyone is able to perform at a level where there's that synergy doesn't just come from embodied expertise. That is important. But I also think that having like a conductor, like in this case, a choreographer, or somebody that is helping to move all the pieces together is a key component to making that work. Because like in the world of cooking, you have the executive chef who is, you know, at times giving nonverbal orders, which I have done in the past. Just like from the look of an eye, you could tell, hey, fire this table. Like, it's really insane. Anyway, that's, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Cool.
That's great. That's great. No, it's really interesting because I was thinking like, should I like say anything here? I mean, like, should I give some direction? And I think like a little bit of direction was fine. But I also feel like this kind of creative process is very satisfying to me in that we're all kind of in it together, and I don't feel like I need to solve all the problems. It's much more compelling to watch them solve problems. And oftentimes what happens is like we get to a performance, they're the experts, and I'm like, did I have anything to do with this? Like literally, I like forget like what I did, and they have mastered it. And so it's just gratifying to be involved in a process with dancers who are so intelligent that they can translate what I'm saying and make kind of like alchemize something that hasn't existed before in this form. And that's the thing that's cool too. It's like I can play this game over and over again, same rules, different day, we'd have a different dance, right? We'd be making different choices on it. So like the variations on it are endless, and yet it kind of creates sort of this knowable world, this like dense sort of networked system of bodies, almost like an organism.
So cool. So I was thinking in response to this comment, if bodies move with a rhythm that is like sound, do minds move similarly, do we think, right? Can the analogy be drawn to the like knowledge that we share propositionally, or no? Does anybody have any intuition? It's like a hard open-ended question and may not have like an immediate answer. Yeah, Rachel.
So one thing I thought was interesting that we're kind of talking about with the synchronicity is y'all form this like assemblage, but simultaneously you also have this autonomy. Yes. And it's kind of like this agential thing, like there's this simultaneity where you're both a unit, but then also the parts to the whole. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know what their name was that was talking. But the thing about like a restaurant, so I used to work at a bar and served for a long time, and we would talk about like you can tell when someone new comes on if they're an experienced server just because of the way they move and the predictive movements. And it reminds me about your own agency, that you can predict the machine's movements because of your own agency, knowing what to do next and what comes in sequence. So as I'm moving, I can know what the other agent is going to do because of my own individuation and knowing what I'm about to do or what I would do in that situation. That allows that to function.
It's a bit of like a private language thing, but a private language that is then like made public. So like by knowing that I have this like form of movement, I can recognize the patterns in someone else and then derive meaning from them. Like this is how I should move in sync. Yeah, super cool.
That's interesting. It's like thinking about the audience component too, of like, not necessarily maybe playing to an audience or dancing for an audience, but there's still that like relationship, or even, I don't know, not to make a kind of analogy too, is like watching really skilled basketball players is almost like a dance in a sense of just in that coordinated movement, and thinking about that like autonomous agent, but the way that they're moving with one another and these pieces. I mean, there's these massive guys on a small court, but the way that they can move around each other is pretty impressive. And it's like, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an athlete, I'm a philosopher, but
brain athlete.
It's still just so impressive watching of like that dynamic between how much of it is, the person, or, Spencer's, you work on these like flow states and thinking about, or like the climber who's in these blacks out or whatever, but there's still the audience, there's still the spectator, and like how much of that influences those movements versus how much of it is just truly being in the zone and not having that awareness of who's.
Sorry to clarify, the question is how the audience influences the performers.
Yeah, I think I found that question along the way of me talking.
Yeah, so like you guys, do you feel like we had an effect?
Yeah.
And then explain. Yeah.
I felt this big difference, especially during the depths of the pandemic, because last year all of our performances were live streamed but no audience. And I remember performing to an empty audience and I was like, this feels so strange. And it's like the energy that is there is it like fuels you without, and then you realize when they're not there, you're like, wow, like that
Something's
energy
missing.
is missing.
Mhm.
And I do believe having you guys here like adds so much more energy. And also like, I believe if we were just in a studio just by ourselves, maybe, I don't know, like maybe we would have played more, like with maybe different options, but this I felt like we were almost performing for you guys the whole time.
Mhm.
So it was like, we need to come to a conclusion now.
Mhm.
But that,
Yeah, so there's an effect on the performer in both like the feedback energy and in the actual content and how the actual content itself like is created. Cool. Alex.
You asked that question. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. That one about, you were trying to draw an analogy here, like, so how we're talking about these sort of, embodied experience and communication stuff. Then you mentioned, is there something parallel going on with the mind?
Yeah, so if the body moves in rhythm, like sound or song, right? Should we analogize our thinking in the same sort of way? Like the whole idea of the lecture is to say, or of this experience is to like, what's the difference between mind and body and what's the same, right? So if the form of representation of bodies in motion is analogous to notes held together through rhythm, does the same hold true for the mind, or is that a space where, like, in the Venn diagram, it's not overlapped?
Yeah, I don't know. Just that's a really interesting, because I mean, the only example I think of is in philosophy is what we do. Right? We think a lot and we think often together, and our thoughts influence one another. We engage in discourse, and I say something, you realize that I was saying something even deeper, and that takes us. But I'm also thinking of that Monty Python sketch where they're making fun of the Cambridge philosopher, and they all these exaggerated movements.
What is yes?
Yeah, but as they're touching themselves and moving around and stuff, they're also embodying the confusion and their like search for truth as they're wandering around the room. And I mean, obviously we kind of satirize that and make fun of it, but I don't know, sometimes I do find myself using my hands a lot, or as I'm thinking through something and use it to illustrate what, I don't know, yeah.
Also, sorry, to
Yeah.
bounce off of that too, is just like thinking about this like riffing off of one another. You watch performers doing that in dance and music and all these kinds of things. But I think no matter what your specialty of expertise is, you can riff in a particular way. So like kind of like you're saying is like, if we're sitting and having a conversation about something or something we're working on, we can move through it in a way and work through these problems in a way that we're seeing each other on this level, versus like if you talk to someone who had only taken like an intro class and they're like, what is life? And you're like, there again, it's that level of expertise of just like how much you've studied and thought about a particular thing. And so once you've reached this level, you can riff in a way that, maybe you can't riff at these different levels.
Well, that's interesting too, because the more you lecture, and especially after you teach the same class, a lot of times you start to know, even though it's new students, you start to know where their thoughts are going as they start saying something. You can anticipate and lead the class in certain directions. Yeah.
And you can also like circumnavigate that
Yeah,
too. Like
yeah.
I can see that's gonna head in this really disastrous way. So let's turn it back around.
Yeah, that's
I
interesting.
love this word riff, because I feel like
Yeah.
in all of our seminars too, that's in a way the ideal, to get to that place where it's sort of like, it's, what would you call it? Kind of a perpetual motion machine, right? It sort of like moves under its own energy, because we're in it, and we're game for the conversation, for the topic.
Well, now like I'm thinking too, because you're the one of the big questions here is, does this count as knowledge or something along those lines, right? Is that fair?
The like aesthetic form that is tapped into that allows the riffing to happen. Is that
Right.
knowledge? Yeah.
And I feel like I want to say it is, but at the same time too, I feel like my intuition about the word knowledge is something that we're like aware of as knowledge, is something that I know, but yet when we were like asking certain questions, like, did you realize you were breathing in unison? Did you realize that you were sharing certain motions and it had this looking in the same direction? You weren't aware of that at all. It seemed like it kind of just stumbled in that direction, but in a unified way, which seems intentional, but probably what wasn't. And so I'm like, I struggle to.
I think it's intelligence. And
exactly, yeah.
expertise way of just in a similar domain of like, you
Yeah.
get into a cadence, right, with your body and teaching and speaking. And so
yeah.
like, you know, you get to the end of it and it's like, do you realize you always like twitch this way, or like you look this way, or you do this thing when you're moving through this particular problem? It's like, I have no knowledge of like, or it's just like, I don't remember anything I just did, because it was like you moved through something in a particular way, but that was just because in the domain that you're used to, you know?
So this is fascinating because one of the things that we train in is a dance form called contact improvisation, where we may be dancing and maintaining connection with another dancer improvisationally for like 20 minutes. And at the end of it, we're like, what just happened? You know, and it's like, there's no way that any of that could happen without some kind of intelligence that's connected through touch. And yet to stop and to perceive and to direct is actually potentially dangerous, you know, because it's almost like the body, the way the body can intuit and its reflexes, like trained reflexes or its intuitions, can actually protect the body a lot faster than thought can. At least in that context of that form of dancing. But it is interesting to be in sort of like this like black box of sensation, and you're just following it and chasing the last point of contact. And 20 minutes later, we're just like, wow, that was awesome. It felt like total flow, but I have no idea what happened.
Yeah.
So what does everybody else think? Should we call the riffing, that communication that happens without communication, knowledge, or should we come up with a different word for it? Does anybody have thoughts on this?
Riff knowledge.
Knowledge dash R. It's very philosopher.
Maybe it's something that requires knowledge to tap into.
Yeah, so you couldn't, like, we couldn't do that exercise, at least not nearly as well, right? Yeah, so there has to be like knowledge to start, and this is why I study expertise, is because it gets rid of that problem. Like, I'm already assuming that these people have knowledge, and then I can talk about the like form of mind that's involved. But I think it's a really important point, is that you have to have some kind of knowledge that, like, before you know how to cook the risotto, you read the recipe, right? So what becomes of like that knowledge when it makes the shift from the knowledge that to the knowledge how? Because you have to have that precursor, right? But it turns into something so different. Yeah.
Can I add
Yeah, please.
also that hasn't it been shown that like having knowledge of something creates interest in it? Is that?
I don't know. Has it?
I feel like that's been like proven or something, but like I like if someone understands something better, they're more likely to be interested in it and like more likely to get into that like flow state.
Yeah, so I know, at least with respect to attention, that attention is driven by interest, right? So there's a really cool study on like unconscious attention, Jang et al. From 2012, maybe 2006. I don't know, but what they do is they have a little cross in the middle of the screen and then a target that'll appear on the left or the right. And then what they'll do is, so it takes your eye like 250 milliseconds or something to like fixate and like represent an object in vision. So like in like 50 milliseconds or something, is like that, so fast. They flash a nude image to the person. So they don't like even, they're not consciously aware of the fact they saw a nude image, and they'll flash it on the right or the left. And based on the gender of the nude image and its location, and you're like the participant's sexuality. So say like I'm a heterosexual male and they flash a nude female on the right side of the screen, and I'm not consciously aware of the fact that they like flash this nude. If the target is on the right side of the screen where the nude was flashed, and I'm like sexually attracted to that orientation, then I look faster than control. If the target is on the left side and the nude was on the right, then I like respond to the target slower. So it's amazing, right? That like your sexual orientation, your interest, right, in bodies of whatever kind, will drive the acuity and speed with which you attend in one way or another. So there you go.
Like Fight Club, sorry.
Fight
Never
Club?
mind.
I want to go there.
He like splices the nude images.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
yes,
exactly.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, just like Fight Club. Yeah.
Can I ask y'all a question?
Oh,
Is there a difference in performing in a more intimate setting like this as opposed to like a bigger audience?
Like for one, I can see all of you. Like in a theater, like it's black. Like you can't
Hmm.
see out as far. So more. I don't know if one's like more intimidating than the other, but the energy is just different.
It's fascinating, right? Because
Yeah.
like on the theater, like it is black, but you know that.
But yeah, you know that there's like hundreds of people watching.
Yes. right.
Yeah.
Or just about that point, I feel like there's like a sense of like imagination that goes along with performing to a larger crowd, because like you have the base knowledge that there are those people there, and then on top of that you have the imagination of like maybe like who's where that you know is coming, or like
I think
what
that
different people might be thinking. And I noticed that imagination has like a huge impact on like my physical embodiment. Like even if like I think like something is like scary around the corner, my heart will start racing.
Mhm.
So it's like this idea, of like the imagined being lived in your body.
But can you explain more what you mean by like the imagination of being in your body? Like what's represented in your imagination, and then how that translates into emotion?
Yeah, so I think like I guess the instance of fear of like whether or not like if I hear a creak in the hallway and I'm like it's late at night, whether or not there's like a person out there who's like the reality of the situation doesn't make an impact, doesn't like touch my mind's or like it doesn't touch either my mind or my body. But if I can imagine that there's someone out there who's like trying to hurt me, my heart will race, I'll feel awake, maybe I'll be jittery, like maybe I'll even like get out of bed, like that action of like moving in preparation or something like that. I don't, sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, that almost sounds to me like what we're describing in the riffing between individuals is like a riffing between your imagination and your body. Like there's that communication thing, the mind-body problem, like in reality occurring.
Or even like the physicality, like what you were talking about, the attention driven by interest, like the physicality of being attentive to something or being interested in something reminds me of like the question of the rhythm of the mind. Like when I'm writing a paper and I like care about it, I definitely feel like a rhythm in the way that I'm thinking, even in like the way that I'm typing.
Cool. Yeah. Lily online has a question, comment.
yeah, I just wanted to circle back. I forgot what was the prompt you asked like 2 questions back, but my thoughts on it was just so like the concept of knowledge, expertise, and flow, I think it's different when it's like an individual activity, you know, a person that is like making pottery, they're in a flow state, but they're doing it alone, right? Or an artist like creating their art, just they're alone. But in this situation, they're dancers who are working together, or chefs, you know, working in a restaurant. And there's a collective thing that happens where all of these patterns of repetition, well, I think to backtrack a little bit, the requisite of having expertise needs to be there first amongst all of the participating individuals. Otherwise, you know, there's like the one cog in the machine. I hate to use that analogy, but like if the one cog doesn't work, like if nothing moves or runs smoothly. But if everyone has that same level of expertise, then other patterns of repetition can tap into this flow state. I think it's kind of like patterns or wavelengths that you're all tapping into. And then the observable wavelength is then reached to the audience. If you can see that, they could feel something from it, right? That's all I got.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Like group flow, how that
Group
it
flow.
might represent a different kind of mind, right? It's a collective mind as opposed to like an individual mind.
Well, when you guys are talking about riffing, I'm not a philosopher, so bear with my eloquentness of speaking. But like, I don't know, we improv a lot, and in a way that's just like a sequence of thought that you're riffing off in your own head, like translated into your own body. So like, I'm sure you guys sit there and think all the time, and like you black out and suddenly you're on a completely different topic than where you
Unfortunately.
started. So like, that's the exact same thing as like improvising in dance. Like, I can improv for 10 minutes and I'm just riffing off of the original thought I had and landing on something different. And I feel like that's what we did just as a collective, because like when I originally made this movement, I was thinking of it slowly, and then Nick did this thing and it turned into something fast. So it morphed into something different, but not anything that it wasn't already.
Yeah, so it's like using each other's motions as your own thoughts in co-improv. That's a neat idea. Cool.
I'm also curious about how we've worked with you, Eric, in this capacity, but in different processes and at different times. But I feel like somehow something happened where we like all were on the same wavelength of like getting to a similar destination.
But that you're saying hadn't happened before, or
Yeah,
has in
well,
some cases not happened before.
Yeah, in some cases has not happened in my experience, or it took longer to reach that place of like cohesion. And for, I don't know why, perhaps this particular group, we know each other quite well, or what the element of it was, but this like stuff in place.
This is interesting, Nick. So I'm wondering if it is both things, like you know each other and we have an audience, you know, and it's sort of like those two things coming together. There's like this interesting, like subtle pressure we're on, you know, and so the decision making that you all went through was actually quite rapid. Right, you came to sort of conclusions and decisions quite quickly. And Haley, because you had mentioned this, like if the audience weren't here, maybe we would play a little bit longer.
Well, I mean, we did this in your process 2 years ago, and it took hours to create 30 seconds. So I know that, like, I know we probably would have played longer. It just was like, we need to have a result right now.
We need to deliver.
We need to deliver.
Which I find kind of amazing, like how complex it was and how like fast it, and like I couldn't memorize all those movements right there. So yeah, super cool.
It's fascinating. Just 5 moves, right?
Yeah.
Based on 5 moves. Yeah.
Do you think it feels different playing the game when you're on or whatever, like you just like are connected like you were describing, versus when it takes longer? Like does the game have a different character aesthetically to you?
Different aesthetically.
I would say, in my opinion, like if you're like whether you're trying to decide, like whether you're trying to play the game like for the purpose of like making a decision and like showing like how the game works, versus like if you're like playing the game like for the purpose of like choreography, as in like I feel like when you're playing for choreography you spend a lot more time being like, does this movement uphold the idea that I want? And you think about it for a while.
Yeah, as opposed to the more like direct improvisational, like it just has to work, and so whatever it is will like satisfy. Cool. Well, we're like solidly at an hour and 40 minutes, so any final comments, questions? It's just like, yeah, please.
So I was just kind of thinking about going to the point of group dynamic. So I play in the symphony with the school, but so they have different conductors. They have like student conductors conduct the orchestra sometimes, and it's just super interesting how different it is every time. It can be the same song, but it's just so incredibly different between the conductors. So,
Yeah, so maybe like having a different puppet would have turned out a different, yeah.
Totally, yes. And
Yeah.
that's the way that we would actually build on the choreography. You know, we would kind of like rotate through the cast with a new puppet, and we'd have like an entirely different sort of assemblage. I love that word that you used, but it would be recognizable, right? That there would be still be sort of like this pattern that would be emerging through the difference.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our dancers. And our philosophers.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great.
For everybody online, next week, we will have class. We'll do flow steps. So I will see you all next week.